The crack of thunder was so loud, it made the cabin walls shake, and Xavier knew before he even opened the door that someone was out there in the storm, desperate and soaked to the bone. He had been living alone in these Colorado mountains for 3 years now, and in all that time, he had never once had an unexpected visitor show up at his door. The nearest settlement was 15 miles down the mountain, and most folks who knew of him thought he was either dead or too dangerous to bother with. Neither was true, but Asher had let the rumors stand because they meant he could live in peace, trapping and hunting without the complications that came with being around other people. But now, as he pulled open the heavy wooden door against the howling wind, he found himself staring at a young woman who looked like she had been through hell itself. Her dark hair was plastered to her face and shoulders, her dress torn and muddy, and she was shaking so violently he could see it even in the dim light from his fireplace. Her lips had taken on a bluish tint, and her eyes were wide with what looked like a mixture of fear and relief. "Please," she said, her voice barely audible over the storm. "Please, I need help." Asher did not hesitate. He reached out and pulled her inside, shutting the door firmly against the wind and rain that tried to follow her in. The woman nearly collapsed against him, and he had to catch her by the shoulders to keep her upright. She was ice cold, trembling violently, and he knew she was dangerously close to succumbing to the elements. "Can you walk?" he asked, his voice gruff from disuse. He had not spoken to another human being in weeks. She nodded weakly, and he guided her toward the fire where the warmth was strongest. His cabin was small but well built, with thick log walls and a stone fireplace that kept the single room comfortable even in the worst weather. He had a narrow bed in one corner, a small table with 2 chairs, shelves lined with supplies and not much else. It was not much, but it was dry and warm, and right now that was all that mattered. "I need to get you out of those wet clothes," he said, then immediately added, "I will give you something dry to wear. You will freeze if you stay in those." The woman just nodded again, too cold to speak. Her teeth were chattering audibly now, and Asher moved quickly to his small trunk where he kept his spare clothes. He pulled out one of his flannel shirts and a pair of wool trousers, both far too large for her, but they would be warm and dry. He also grabbed a thick blanket from his bed. "There is a screen over there," he said, pointing to a corner where he had rigged up a privacy screen from an old quilt. "Get changed behind that. I will turn around." He did turn around, facing the fire and adding another log to keep it burning hot. Behind him, he could hear the rustle of wet fabric being removed, the soft sounds of struggle as she tried to work her cold, clumsy fingers through the process of changing. It took longer than it should have, and he found himself wanting to help but knowing that would be entirely inappropriate. They were strangers, and she was already vulnerable enough without him making things worse. Finally, she spoke. "I am changed." Asher turned to find her wrapped in his shirt and trousers, both of which hung on her small frame like they were made for someone twice her size. She had rolled up the sleeves and pant legs, but she still looked lost in the fabric. The blanket was wrapped around her shoulders, and some color was starting to return to her face now that she was out of the wet clothes. "Sit by the fire," he said, dragging one of his chairs closer to the hearth. "I will make you something hot to drink." She sank into the chair gratefully, and Asher went about preparing coffee. He kept a pot ready most of the time, and it did not take long to heat it up over the fire. While he worked, he could feel her eyes on him, watching his movements. He was a big man, tall and broad-shouldered from years of hard work in the mountains. His hair was dark and hung to his shoulders, and his beard was thick and untrimmed. He knew he probably looked like something out of a nightmare to a proper town woman, but she did not seem afraid of him. just exhausted and cold. When the coffee was ready, he poured her a cup and handed it to her. She took it with both hands, holding it close to her face and breathing in the steam before taking a careful sip. "Thank you," she said, and this time her voice was steadier. "I thought I was going to die out there." "You might have," Asher said bluntly. "It is dangerous to be out in a storm like this, especially at this altitude. What were you doing out there?" For a moment she did not answer. She just stared into the fire, her expression troubled. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet but determined. "Running away." Asher pulled the other chair over and sat down across from her, giving her space but close enough to hear her over the storm that still raged outside. "From what?" She looked at him then, really looked at him, as if trying to decide whether she could trust him. Whatever she saw in his face must have satisfied her because she started talking. "My name is Thea Owens," she said. "I was supposed to get married yesterday, in Denver, to a man I have never met." Asher frowned. "Arranged marriage. My father arranged it," Thea said bitterly. "He owns a dry goods store in Denver, and he got into debt with a man named Richard Carlisle. Carlisle is rich, powerful, and he wanted a young wife. My father offered me up like I was just another piece of merchandise to settle his debts." "And you ran." "I ran," she confirmed. "The wedding was supposed to be at 2 in the afternoon. I waited until everyone was at the church, and then I took a horse from the stable and just rode. I did not know where I was going. I just knew I could not marry that man. He is 40 years older than me, and the things I have heard about him." She shuddered, and it had nothing to do with the cold this time. Asher felt a surge of anger at the story, though he kept his expression neutral. He had seen enough of so-called civilized society to know that women were often treated as property, traded and sold for the benefit of men. It was one of the many reasons he had chosen to leave that world behind. "How did you end up here?" he asked. "The horse threw me," Thea said. "I am not a very good rider, and when the storm started, he got spooked. I fell and he ran off. I had no idea where I was, but I saw smoke from your chimney and just started walking toward it. I honestly did not know if anyone would be here, or if they would help me if they were." "You were lucky," Asher said. "There are not many cabins up this high, and not all of them are occupied. You could have walked for hours and found nothing." "I know," Thea said quietly. "I know I was lucky, and I know I have put you in a difficult position by coming here. If my father or Richard Carlisle finds out you helped me, they might cause trouble for you." Asher almost smiled at that. "Let them try. They would have to find me first, and then they would have to deal with me. I am not afraid of wealthy men from Denver." Thea studied him for a long moment. "You are different from anyone I have ever met. I will take that as a compliment." She did smile then, just a small one, but it transformed her face. Even exhausted and wearing oversized clothes, she was beautiful. Her eyes were a deep brown, warm and intelligent, and there was a strength in her expression that spoke of determination and courage. It had taken guts to run away from an arranged marriage, to ride off into the wilderness with no plan and no destination. Most women in her position would have simply accepted their fate. "You can stay here tonight," Asher said. "The storm should pass by morning, and then we can figure out what to do next." "I do not want to impose," Thea said, though her relief was obvious. "You are not imposing. I have a bed." "You can take it. I will sleep on the floor." "I cannot take your bed." "You can and you will," Asher said firmly. "You have been through enough today. You need proper rest, and I am used to sleeping rough. It will not bother me." Thea looked like she wanted to argue, but she was too tired. She finished her coffee and set the cup aside, pulling the blanket tighter around herself. The warmth from the fire and the hot drink were finally doing their job, and the color had fully returned to her face. "I do not even know your name," she said suddenly. "Asher Xavier." Asher, she repeated as if testing how it sounded. That is a good name, strong. My mother chose it. She said I came into the world fighting and I would need a strong name to match. Was she right? Asher thought about that. I suppose she was. I have been fighting one thing or another most of my life. What brought you up here? Thea asked. To the mountains, I mean, away from everything. It was Asher's turn to be quiet, to decide how much to share. He was not used to talking about himself, not used to having anyone care enough to ask. But there was something about Thea that made him want to open up, to let her see past the rough exterior he had built up over the years. I was a soldier, he said finally. During the war, Confederate Army, though I had my doubts about the cause even then. I was young and stupid, and I thought fighting was the right thing to do. By the time I realized how wrong I was, I had already seen and done things I wish I could forget. Thea listened without interrupting, her eyes never leaving his face. When the war ended, I tried to go back to regular life, Asher continued. But I could not settle, could not stand being around people, hearing them talk about things that seemed so trivial after everything I had been through. So I came up here, built this cabin, started trapping and hunting. It has been 3 years now, and I have not regretted it once. Do you ever get lonely? Thea asked softly. Sometimes, Asher admitted. But I prefer loneliness to the alternative. People complicate things. They demand things. They judge and criticize and try to make you into something you are not. Up here, I can just be myself. I think I understand that, Thea said. I have spent my whole life being told what to do, how to act, who to be. My father wanted me to be the perfect daughter, obedient and quiet. Richard Carlyle wanted me to be his decorative young wife. No one ever asked what I wanted. What do you want? Asher asked. Thea looked into the fire, her expression thoughtful. I want to be free. I want to make my own choices, live my own life. I want to matter as more than just someone's daughter or someone's wife. I want to be myself, whoever that turns out to be. That is a good goal, Asher said. Worth fighting for. I hope so, Thea said. Because I have burned my bridges now, I cannot go back to Denver. My father will disown me for running away, and Richard Carlyle will want revenge for the humiliation. I do not know where I am going to go or what I am going to do, but I know I cannot go back. You will figure it out, Asher said with more confidence than he felt. The truth was, a young woman alone in the Colorado Territory in 1878 had limited options, especially one who had just run away from a powerful man. But he did not want to add to her worries tonight. She had been through enough. The storm continued to rage outside, but inside the cabin it was warm and quiet except for the crackling of the fire. Thea's eyes were starting to droop, exhaustion finally catching up with her now that she was safe and warm. You should get some sleep, Asher said gently. The bed is ready whenever you are. Thea nodded and stood up slowly, still wrapped in the blanket. She walked over to the bed and sat down on the edge, looking back at Asher with an expression he could not quite read. Thank you, she said, for everything. For taking me in, for not asking too many questions, for not trying to send me back. You have saved my life tonight, and I will never forget that. Anyone would have done the same, Asher said, though he knew that was not true. Many men would have seen a young woman alone as an opportunity to take advantage. Others would have turned her away to avoid getting involved. He had done what felt right, nothing more. Not anyone, Thea said. You are a good man, Asher Xavier, I can tell. She lay down then, pulling the blankets up over herself, and within minutes her breathing had evened out into sleep. Asher sat by the fire for a while longer, watching the flames and listening to the storm. His mind was full of questions and concerns, but underneath it all was something else. Something he had not felt in a very long time. Interest. Curiosity. a connection to another human being that went beyond mere duty or politeness. Thea Owens had walked into his life by accident, driven by desperation and a storm, and somehow in the space of a few hours, she had managed to reach past all his carefully constructed walls. He did not know what that meant, or what would happen when morning came. But for now, he was content to sit by the fire and keep watch, making sure she was safe and warm. It was the least he could do, and maybe, just maybe, it was the start of something neither of them had been looking for but both of them needed. When Thea woke the next morning, the storm had passed, and sunlight was streaming through the cabin's small window. For a moment, she was disoriented, unsure where she was or how she had gotten there. Then the memories came flooding back: the wedding she had run from, the desperate ride through the mountains, the storm, and finally stumbling upon this cabin and the man who had taken her in. She sat up slowly, looking around the cabin in the daylight. It was even smaller than she had realized last night, but it was clean and well organized. Everything had its place, from the neat rows of supplies on the shelves to the tools hanging on the wall. It was the home of a man who took care of what he had, who lived with purpose and intention. Asher was not in the cabin. The fire was still burning, freshly stoked, and there was a pot of something that smelled wonderful sitting near the coals. Thea stood up and walked over to investigate, her bare feet cold on the wooden floor. She realized she was still wearing Asher's oversized clothes, and her own dress was hanging near the fire, apparently set there to dry. The cabin door opened, and Asher came in carrying an armful of firewood. He stopped when he saw her awake, and something that might have been a smile flickered across his face. "Good morning," he said. "I hope you slept well." "Better than I have in weeks," Thea admitted. "What time is it? Past 9? You needed the rest." He set the firewood down near the hearth and gestured to the pot. "I made breakfast. Nothing fancy, just porridge and some dried venison, but it will fill you up." "It smells amazing," Thea said honestly. Her stomach growled, reminding her that she had not eaten since yesterday morning before she ran away from the wedding. Asher dished up 2 bowls and they sat at the small table to eat. The porridge was thick and warm, sweetened with a little honey, and the venison was surprisingly good. Thea ate hungrily, grateful for the simple but nourishing meal. "Your dress is almost dry," Asher said between bites. "Another hour or 2 by the fire and it should be ready." "Thank you," Thea said. Then, more hesitantly, "What happens after that?" Asher set down his spoon and looked at her directly. "That depends on what you want. I told you last night that you would figure things out, and I meant it, but we need to make a plan." "I cannot go back to Denver," Thea said firmly. "That is the one thing I know for certain." "Agreed. Going back would be dangerous for you, but you need to go somewhere. Do you have any other family? Friends who might take you in?" Thea shook her head. "My mother died when I was young, and my father is my only family. I had friends in Denver, but none of them would risk crossing Richard Carlisle to help me. He has too much power, too much influence." "What about other towns? Could you start over somewhere else?" "Maybe," Thea said slowly. "But I would need money, and I left Denver with nothing but the clothes on my back. I have no skills that would help me find work. I was raised to be a wife, not to support myself." Asher frowned, thinking. "There are mining towns scattered throughout the territory. Some of them are rough, but they have boarding houses and businesses that might hire a woman for cooking or cleaning work. It would not be easy, but it would be a start." "Would you take me to one of these towns?" Thea asked. She hated how helpless she sounded, but the truth was she had no idea how to survive on her own in this wilderness. "I could," Asher said carefully, "but I need to be honest with you about something. If I take you to a town, people will talk. They will assume things about you, about us. Your reputation might be damaged beyond repair. My reputation is already ruined, Thea said with a bitter laugh. I ran away from my wedding. By now, all of Denver knows what I did. A ruined reputation is the least of my worries. Fair enough, Asher said. Then yes, I will take you. There is a town called Georgetown about 20 miles from here. It is a mining town, busy and growing. You could probably find work there and no one would ask too many questions about where you came from. Thea felt a wave of relief wash over her. She had a plan, or at least the beginnings of one. When can we leave? Tomorrow morning, Asher said. I need to prepare some things and you need another day of rest. That ride through the storm took a lot out of you, and the journey to Georgetown will not be easy either. Thank you, Thea said, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. You are doing more for me than anyone has ever done. Why? Asher was quiet for a moment, considering the question. Because you deserve help. Because what your father and that Carlisle man tried to do to you was wrong, and because... He paused, then continued more quietly. Because I know what it is like to need a fresh start, to want to leave your old life behind and become something new. When I came up to these mountains, I was running away too, just from different things. From the war, Thea said, remembering what he had told her the night before. From the war, from the things I did during it, from the man I was becoming because of it. I needed to escape before I lost myself completely. So I understand what you are feeling right now. The fear, the uncertainty, but also the hope. The sense that maybe, just maybe, you can build something better. Thea reached across the table and put her hand on his. It was a bold gesture, one that would have been scandalous in her old life. But up here in this cabin, normal social rules seemed to have been suspended. Did you build something better? She asked. Asher looked down at her hand on his, then back up at her face. I built something quieter, something simpler. I do not know if it is better, but it is mine. That counts for something. They sat like that for a moment, hands touching across the table, and Thea felt something shift between them. It was not quite attraction, not yet, but it was connection. Understanding. Two people who had both been hurt by the world finding a moment of peace together. Then Asher gently pulled his hand back and stood up. I need to check my traps today and gather some supplies for the journey. You should rest and regain your strength. Read if you like. I have a few books on the shelf, or just sit by the fire, whatever you need. Can I help you? Thea asked. With the traps, I mean. I feel useless just sitting here. Asher looked surprised. It is rough work, cold and muddy, not what you are used to. I am not used to any of this, Thea pointed out. But if I am going to make it on my own, I need to learn how to do hard things, how to work. Let me help you. There was something in her voice that must have convinced him, because after a moment, Asher nodded. All right, but you will need warmer clothes than that dress. I have an extra coat and some boots that might work if we stuff them with rags. They will be too big, but better than nothing. An hour later, Thea found herself trudging through the forest behind Asher, wearing his oversized coat and boots, her dress back on under the coat for warmth. The ground was wet from the storm, and the air was crisp and cold, but the sun was out and the sky was a brilliant blue. It was beautiful up here in a way that Denver never was, wild and untamed and free. Asher's traps were set in a wide circuit around his cabin, designed to catch small game like rabbits and the occasional fox. He checked each one methodically, resetting those that had been triggered and collecting the animals that had been caught. It was not pleasant work. Thea had never seen a dead animal up close before, but she forced herself to watch and learn. This was reality, she told herself. This was how people survived in places like this. You are handling this better than I expected, Asher commented as he reset a trap. Most town women would be fainting by now. I am tougher than I look, Thea said, though her stomach was churning a bit. "Besides, I need to learn. If I am going to survive on my own, I cannot afford to be squeamish." "You are not going to be trapping rabbits in Georgetown," Asher said with a hint of amusement. "But I understand what you mean. It is good to know you can handle difficult things." They continued working in companionable silence, moving from trap to trap. Thea found herself watching Asher as he worked, noticing things she had been too cold and exhausted to see the night before. The way he moved with confidence and purpose through the forest, reading the land like it was a language he was fluent in. The gentleness in his large hands as he handled the animals he had caught, quick and efficient so they did not suffer. The way he automatically checked the sky and the wind, always aware of his surroundings. He was completely at home out here, she realized. This was not just a hiding place for him. It was where he belonged. "Why did you leave?" she asked suddenly. "After the war, why did you come all the way up here? Could you not have just found a quiet town somewhere?" Asher did not answer right away. He finished with the trap he was working on and straightened up, looking out at the mountains that surrounded them. "I tried that," he said finally. "After I was discharged, I went to a little town in Kansas. Thought I would start over, maybe become a farmer or a carpenter, something peaceful." "What happened?" "I could not do it," Asher said simply. "Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the war. The battles, the dead, the things I had done to survive. I would wake up in the middle of the night in a panic, reaching for a rifle that was not there. And during the day, I could not stand being around people. Their conversations seemed meaningless. Their problems seemed trivial. I felt like I was going mad." "So you left." "So I left," Asher confirmed. "I packed up what little I had and just started walking west. Eventually, I ended up here in these mountains, and something about this place calmed me. The silence, the solitude, the sheer scale of it all. Up here, the war feels far away. The noise in my head gets quieter. I can breathe." Thea understood more than he probably realized. She had not been to war, but she knew what it was like to feel suffocated by expectations and demands, to need escape just to stay sane. "I am glad you found this place," she said softly. "I am glad you were here when I needed help." Asher looked at her then, really looked at her, and something passed between them again. That same connection, that same understanding. But this time there was something else too. Something warmer, more personal. "So am I," he said, his voice rough with an emotion Thea could not quite name. They finished checking the traps and headed back to the cabin, carrying their catch. The sun was high now, and despite the cold, Thea found she was actually enjoying herself. There was something satisfying about the physical work, about being outside in the fresh air, about doing something productive with her hands. Back at the cabin, Asher showed her how to prepare the rabbits they had caught. It was messy, unpleasant work, but Thea watched carefully and even helped a little. Asher was patient with her inexperience, showing her what to do without making her feel foolish for not knowing. "You are a good teacher," Thea observed as they worked. "I had a good teacher once," Asher said. "An old trapper named Samuel who I met when I first came up here. He took pity on me, showed me how to survive in the mountains. I probably would have died that first winter without his help." "Where is he now?" "Dead," Asher said matter-of-factly. "Passed away 2 winters ago. He was old and it was his time, but I think about him often. He gave me the tools to build this life." "And now you are giving me the tools to build mine," Thea said. Asher smiled slightly. "I suppose I am, though your tools are going to look different than mine. You are not going to be a mountain hermit." "No," Thea agreed. "But I am going to be independent. I am going to take care of myself. That is what matters." They spent the rest of the day preparing for the journey to Georgetown. Asher packed supplies, food, water, extra blankets while Thea cleaned the cabin and helped in whatever ways she could. It felt strange, this domestic routine with a man she had just met, but it also felt oddly natural. They worked well together, she realized. They understood each other without needing many words. That evening they sat by the fire again, eating stew that Asher had made from the rabbit and some vegetables from his stores. The cabin was warm and cozy, and outside, the stars were coming out in a sky so clear it took Thea's breath away. "I have never seen stars like this," she said, looking out the window. "In Denver you can see them, but not like this." "Too many lights in the city," Asher said. "Up here on a clear night it is like you can see the whole universe." "Can we go outside?" Thea asked impulsively. "Just for a few minutes. I want to see them properly." Asher looked surprised but nodded. They bundled up in coats and stepped outside into the cold night air. The temperature had dropped significantly, and Thea's breath came out in white puffs, but she barely noticed. Above them, the sky was a blanket of stars so thick and bright it seemed impossible. "Oh," Thea breathed. "Oh, it is beautiful." "It is," Asher agreed, but when Thea glanced over at him, she found he was not looking at the sky. He was looking at her. Their eyes met, and for a moment neither of them moved. Then Asher looked away, clearing his throat. "We should go back inside," he said gruffly. "It is too cold out here." But as they turned to go back into the cabin, Thea caught his hand. He stopped, looking down at where her smaller hand was wrapped around his larger one. "Asher," she said quietly, "I know we just met. I know this is all strange and sudden, but I want you to know that I am grateful, not just for the help but for—" She paused, searching for the right words. "For seeing me. For treating me like a person with my own thoughts and dreams, not just some helpless girl who needs to be managed. You have no idea how rare that is." Asher's expression softened. "You are easy to see, Thea. You have more courage and strength than most people I have met. Running away from that wedding, surviving the storm, being willing to face an uncertain future rather than accept a life you did not want, that takes real bravery." "I do not feel brave," Thea admitted. "I feel terrified most of the time." "Being brave does not mean you are not scared," Asher said. "It means you do what needs to be done even though you are scared. That is what you did. That is what you are still doing." They stood there in the starlight, hands still linked, and Thea felt her heart beating faster. She was not naive, she knew what she was feeling was attraction. But it was more than that. It was respect, admiration, a sense of having found someone who understood her in a way no one else ever had. "We should go in," Asher said again, but he did not move. Neither did Thea. "What if I do not want to go to Georgetown?" she asked suddenly. "What if I wanted to stay here instead?" Asher's eyes widened. "Thea, you cannot stay here. This is no life for you. You would be stuck on a mountain with a man you barely know, isolated from everything and everyone. You deserve more than that." "But what if it is what I want?" Thea pressed. "What if I would rather be here with you than in some mining town trying to make it on my own?" "You are not thinking clearly," Asher said, though his voice had lost some of its certainty. "You are grateful, and maybe you feel safe here, but that is not the same as wanting to build a life in these mountains. You do not know what that would mean. The loneliness, the hardship, the isolation. I know it would mean being with someone who sees me as an equal," Thea said. "Someone who does not try to control me or own me. Someone I could build something real with, something honest. Thea." Asher's voice was strained now. "Do not do this. Do not say things you do not mean just because you are scared of leaving." "I mean every word," Thea said firmly. "I am not a child, Asher. I am 22 years old and I know my own mind. I know we just met. I know this is fast. But I also know that I feel something when I am with you, something I have never felt with anyone else. Safety, yes, but also possibility. like I could become who I am really meant to be. Asher closed his eyes briefly, as if he was in pain. When he opened them, there was something raw and vulnerable in his expression. I feel it too, he said quietly. From the moment you walked through my door, soaked and shivering, I felt it. But that is why I need to take you to Georgetown. Because if you stay, it has to be for the right reasons. Not because you are running away from something, but because you are running towards something. And you need time to know which it is. Thea wanted to argue, wanted to tell him she already knew, but something in his expression stopped her. He was right, she realized. She was making a huge decision based on a day and a half of knowing him. No matter how strong her feelings were, she needed to be sure. She needed to test herself, to see if she could survive on her own before she chose to build a life with someone else. "All right," she said finally. "We will go to Georgetown tomorrow, but Asher." She tightened her grip on his hand. "This is not over. Whatever this is between us, I am not walking away from it unless you tell me you do not want me." "I did not say that," Asher said quickly. "I did not say I did not want you. Then what are you saying?" "I am saying that I want you to be sure, that I want you to have choices, that I want you to choose me because it is what you truly want, not because I was the first port in a storm." Thea reached up with her free hand and touched his bearded cheek. He flinched slightly at the contact, as if he was not used to being touched gently, but he did not pull away. "You are not just a port in a storm," she said softly. "You are the most real person I have ever met, and I think, maybe, you are what I have been looking for without knowing it." Then, before she could second-guess herself, she rose up on her toes and kissed him. It was brief and chaste, just a press of lips, but it sent a shock through both of them. When she pulled back, Asher was staring at her with an expression of wonder and disbelief. "Thea," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We should go inside now," Thea said, echoing his earlier words. "Before we freeze." This time they did go inside, but everything had changed. The air between them felt charged, electric with possibility. They prepared for bed in silence, both hyper-aware of the other's presence. Thea took the bed again, despite her protests, and Asher made himself a pallet on the floor near the fire. But neither of them slept much that night. Thea lay in the darkness, staring at the ceiling and thinking about the man just a few feet away. About the kiss she had given him, about the feelings growing inside her that were both thrilling and terrifying. About the fact that tomorrow she would leave this cabin and might never come back. She must have dozed off eventually, because when she woke, sunlight was streaming through the window and Asher was already up, packing the last of their supplies. He looked tired, with dark circles under his eyes, and Thea wondered if he had slept at all. "Morning," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Are you ready?" "As ready as I will ever be," Thea said, sitting up. They ate a quick breakfast in silence, then Asher helped her bundle up for the journey. Her own dress was dry now, but he insisted she wear his extra coat over it and a pair of his boots with thick socks stuffed in the toes. She looked ridiculous, she was sure, but at least she would be warm. Asher saddled his horse, a sturdy brown mare named Sadie, and loaded their supplies. Then he helped Thea mount and swung up behind her. It was necessary they only had one horse, but it meant sitting pressed against each other for the entire journey. Thea tried not to think about how good it felt to be held by him, protected by his arms on either side of her as he held the reins. They rode in silence for the first hour, following a narrow trail down the mountain. The landscape was breathtaking, all towering pines and rocky outcroppings and distant peaks still capped with snow. Thea had never been so far from civilization before, and part of her was terrified. But another part felt more alive than she ever had. "How long will the journey take?" she asked finally, breaking the silence. "Most of the day," Asher said from behind her. We will reach Georgetown by evening if the weather holds. And then what? You will just leave me there." Asher was quiet for a moment. "I will help you find a boarding house. Make sure you have a safe place to stay. I have a little money saved. I will give you enough to get started." "I cannot take your money," Thea protested. "You can and you will," Asher said firmly. "Think of it as payment for the work you did yesterday, checking the traps and preparing the rabbits." "That is not necessary." "Maybe not, but I am doing it anyway." They fell silent again, but it was not an uncomfortable silence. Despite everything, despite the uncertainty of what came next, Thea felt at peace. She leaned back slightly, letting herself rest against Asher's solid chest, and felt him tense for a moment before relaxing. "Thea," he said quietly, "about last night, about what you said." "I meant it," Thea said before he could continue. "Every word." "I know you did, but I need you to understand something. If you decide you want to come back, if you decide Georgetown is not for you and you want to try living in the mountains, it will not be easy. I can offer you safety and honesty and whatever is growing between us, but I cannot offer you comfort or luxury or the kind of life you are used to." "I do not want that life," Thea said. "That life was suffocating me. I want something real, Asher, something that matters. And I think I could find that with you. You might find it in Georgetown too," Asher pointed out. "You might meet someone else, build a different life." "Is that what you want?" Thea asked. "For me to meet someone else?" "No," Asher admitted, his voice rough. "But what I want is not what is most important here. What matters is what is best for you." "Let me decide what is best for me," Thea said firmly. "I have spent my whole life having other people make decisions on my behalf. I do not need you to do the same thing, even if you are trying to be noble about it." Asher actually laughed at that, a short bark of surprised amusement. "You do not pull your punches, do you?" "Not anymore," Thea said. "I am done being polite and obedient. From now on, I say what I think and do what I believe is right." "I can see that," Asher said, and there was warmth in his voice now. "All right, Thea Owens. I will not make decisions for you, but I do want you to give Georgetown a real chance. Not because I do not want you, but because I do. And if you come back to me, I want to know it is because you chose me, not because you felt like you had no other option." "That is fair," Thea agreed. "So here is what I propose. I will stay in Georgetown for 2 weeks. I will try to find work, try to build a life there, see what it is like to be on my own. And at the end of 2 weeks I will decide. Either I stay there and make a go of it, or I come back to you and we figure out what this thing between us really is." 2 weeks, Asher repeated. "That is not very long." "It is long enough to know if I can stand being away from you," Thea said. "And long enough for you to decide if you really want me in your life, or if I was just a pleasant distraction for a couple of days." "You are not a distraction," Asher said quietly. "You are the first person who has made me want to connect with another human being in 3 years. You are the first woman who has made me think that maybe, just maybe, I do not have to spend the rest of my life alone on this mountain." Thea twisted around as much as she could in the saddle, meeting his eyes. "Then we have an agreement. 2 weeks, and then we will see." 2 weeks, Asher agreed. They sealed the promise with another kiss, longer this time, deeper. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. "We should keep riding," Asher said, his voice strained. "At this rate, we will never make it to Georgetown." Thea laughed and turned back around, settling against him for the remainder of the journey. The hours passed more quickly now, filled with conversation as they learned more about each other. Asher told her about his childhood in Virginia, about his parents who had both died before the war, about the sister he had not seen in years and did not know if he would ever see again. Thea told him about growing up in Denver, about her mother who had died of fever when Thea was 12, about the loneliness of living with a father who saw her as property rather than a person. They talked about everything and nothing, building a foundation of understanding that went beyond the initial attraction. By the time Georgetown came into view in the valley below, Thea felt like she had known Asher for years, rather than just 2 days. Georgetown was indeed a mining town, busy and loud and full of life. The main street was lined with saloons, stores, and hotels, and there were men everywhere, miners fresh from the mountains, merchants, gamblers, and all the other people who followed where money was to be made. It was chaotic and overwhelming after the peace of Asher's cabin, and Thea felt herself tensing as they rode into town. "It is all right," Asher murmured in her ear. "I am right here. I will find you a safe place before I leave." He guided Sadie to a respectable-looking boarding house at the quieter end of town. The sign out front said Mrs. Adelaide Morrison, proprietress, clean rooms, good meals. Asher helped Thea down from the horse and tied Sadie to the hitching post. "Wait here," he said. "I will go talk to the proprietress, make sure she has a room and that she is trustworthy." Thea nodded and watched as Asher disappeared inside. She felt exposed standing on the street in her oversized clothes, very aware of the curious looks she was getting from passers-by. She crossed her arms over her chest and tried to look confident, even though she felt anything but. Asher emerged a few minutes later with a middle-aged woman in a neat gray dress. She had a kind face and sharp eyes that assessed Thea quickly but not unkindly. "This is Mrs. Morrison," Asher said. "She has a room available and she knows of some places in town that might be hiring." "You poor dear," Mrs. Morrison said, taking in Thea's bedraggled appearance. "You look like you have been through quite an ordeal. Come inside and let me get you settled. Mr. Xavier here has paid for a week in advance, so you do not need to worry about that." "A week," Thea said, looking at Asher. They had agreed on 2 weeks. "You can pay for the second week yourself if you find work," Asher said quietly. "Prove to yourself that you can do it." Thea understood. He was giving her a safety net, but not so much that she would not have to try. She nodded her acceptance. Mrs. Morrison bustled Thea inside, chattering about the amenities of the boarding house and the rules of the establishment. Asher followed with their small bundle of supplies. The room Mrs. Morrison showed them was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a chair by the window. It was perfectly adequate, and yet it felt empty and lonely compared to Asher's cabin. "I will leave you two to say your goodbyes, Mrs. Morrison said tactfully, stepping out and closing the door behind her. Suddenly, Thea and Asher were alone again, and the reality of their impending separation hit hard. Thea felt tears prickling at her eyes and blinked them back fiercely. She had promised herself she would be strong. 2 weeks, Asher said, taking both her hands in his. "You can do this, Thea. I know you can." "I know I can too," Thea said, though her voice wavered. "It is just, I was not expecting to feel this way so soon." "Neither was I," Asher admitted, "but maybe that is how it works sometimes." "Not a slow build, but a lightning strike." "A lightning strike," Thea repeated, liking the metaphor. "That is what it felt like when I saw you at the door of your cabin, like lightning." Asher pulled her into a hug, and Thea wrapped her arms around him, holding on tight. He was so solid, so warm, so safe. The thought of letting go felt impossible. "If you need me," Asher said into her hair, "if anything goes wrong or you are in danger, send word. Mrs. Morrison knows where my cabin is. I will come for you immediately." "I will be all right," Thea said, though she was not entirely sure she believed it. "I know you will," Asher said. "You are the strongest person I have ever met." He pulled back and cupped her face in his large hands, looking down at her with an intensity that made her heart skip. 2 weeks, he said again. And then I will come back if you want me to. I will want you to, Thea said with certainty. I already know I will. Give Georgetown a fair chance anyway, Asher said. Promise me. I promise. He kissed her then, a kiss that was both a promise and a goodbye. When they finally broke apart, Thea had tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling too. Go, she said, pushing him gently toward the door, before I beg you to stay and ruin everything. Asher smiled sadly and walked to the door. He paused with his hand on the handle, looking back at her. 2 weeks, Thea Owens. I will be counting every day, so will I. And then he was gone, and Thea was alone in the small boarding house room, feeling like part of her soul had just walked out the door. The first few days in Georgetown were harder than Thea had anticipated. Mrs. Morrison was kind and the boarding house was comfortable, but Thea felt adrift without Asher's steadying presence. The town was loud and crowded, full of rough men and women who looked at her with suspicious eyes. She spent the first 2 days mostly in her room, working up the courage to venture out and look for work. On the third day, Mrs. Morrison knocked on her door with a proposition. I have been thinking, the older woman said. I could use some help around here if you are interested. Nothing permanent, mind you, but maybe a trial period. You would help with cooking, cleaning, laundry, and such. In exchange, I would give you room and board plus a small wage. Thea nearly cried with relief. Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Mrs. Morrison. Call me Adelaide, the woman said with a smile. And you are welcome, dear. Truth be told, I've been needing help for a while now, but I have not found anyone I trusted. But when that mountain man brought you in and I saw the way he looked at you, well, I figured you must be a decent sort. Asher Xavier is a good judge of character. You know Asher? Thea asked, surprised. Not well, but he comes to town a few times a year to sell his furs and buy supplies. He is a man of few words, but he is honest and fair in his dealings. When he paid for your room, he told me you had run away from an arranged marriage and needed a fresh start. Asked me to look after you. I respect a woman who chooses her own path, so I said I would. Thea felt a surge of affection for Asher. Even after leaving, he was still taking care of her. He is a good man, he is, Adelaide agreed. And unless I miss my guess, you are in love with him. Thea blushed but did not deny it. Is it that obvious to someone who is looking? Yes. The question is, what are you going to do about it? I am going to stay here for 2 weeks like I promised, Thea said, and then I am going back to him. Adelaide nodded approvingly. Good. A woman should know her own mind. Now come on, I will show you how things work around here. The work was hard but satisfying. Thea learned how to cook large meals for the boarding house residents, how to do laundry properly, how to clean efficiently. Adelaide was a patient teacher, and gradually Thea began to feel competent and useful. She also began to make friends with the other residents of the boarding house, a school teacher named Clara, a young couple who ran a bakery, an elderly prospector who told wild stories about his mining days. But as much as she was learning and growing, as much as she was proving to herself that she could survive on her own, Thea missed Asher with an ache that never quite went away. She thought about him constantly, wondered what he was doing, whether he was thinking about her, whether he was as lonely in his cabin as she was in Georgetown. The days crawled by with agonizing slowness. 1 week passed, then 10 days, then 12. Thea threw herself into her work, trying to distract herself from counting the hours until she could see Asher again. She took pride in the fact that she was making it on her own, earning her own money and proving she did not need to be dependent on anyone. But she also knew with absolute certainty that she wanted to be with Asher. Not because she needed him to survive, but because she wanted to share her life with him. On the 13th day, something happened that tested her resolve. A well-dressed man came to the boarding house looking for a young woman matching Thea's description. Adelaide, bless her, told the man she had not seen anyone like that and sent him away. But the encounter left Thea shaken. "It was someone looking for you?" Adelaide asked after the man had gone. "Probably," Thea admitted. "My father or Richard Carlyle must have sent him." "Well, he is gone now, but he might come back. You should be careful." That night, Thea lay awake thinking about what would happen if she was found. Richard Carlyle had money and influence. He could make her life very difficult if he wanted to. The thought of being forced back to Denver, back into the life she had escaped, filled her with dread. But it also clarified something. She did not want to spend her life running and hiding. She wanted to be somewhere she felt truly safe, with someone who would stand beside her no matter what came. She wanted to be with Asher. The 14th day finally arrived, and Thea was packed and ready by dawn. She had paid Adelaide for her second week of room and board out of the wages she had earned, leaving her with a small amount of money but a huge sense of pride. She had done it. She had survived on her own, proved she was capable. Now she could go to Asher knowing that she was choosing him freely, not out of desperation. "You are sure about this?" Adelaide asked as Thea prepared to leave. "Georgetown is growing. You could build a good life here if you wanted to." "I am sure," Thea said. "I am grateful for everything you have done for me, Adelaide. You gave me a chance when I needed it most. But my heart is in those mountains with a man who saw me for who I really am." Adelaide smiled and pulled Thea into a hug. "Then go to him, dear, and be happy." Thea asked around town and managed to arrange a ride with a trapper who was heading up into the mountains. He was an older man named Tom who knew Asher and was happy to drop Thea off near his cabin. The journey took most of the day, and by the time they reached the area where Asher lived, the sun was getting low in the sky. "His cabin is about a mile up that trail," Tom said, pointing. "You sure you want to walk it alone?" "I am sure," Thea said. "Thank you for the ride." She set off up the trail with her heart pounding. What if Asher had changed his mind? What if 2 weeks had given him time to realize he was better off alone? What if he did not want her anymore? But as she came around a bend in the trail and saw the cabin, she saw Asher standing outside, looking down the path as if he had been watching for her. The moment he saw her, his face lit up with joy, and he started running toward her. Thea ran too, and they met in the middle of the trail. Asher swept her up in his arms and spun her around, both of them laughing and crying at the same time. "You came back," Asher said, setting her down but not letting go. "I was afraid you would not come back." "I was always coming back," Thea said, reaching up to touch his face. "I just needed to prove to myself that I was choosing you, not just running away from something else. And now I know. I am choosing you, Asher Xavier, if you will have me." "If I will have you," Asher said incredulously. "Thea, I have been miserable without you. This cabin felt empty." "My life felt empty. You walked into my world and turned everything upside down, and I do not ever want to go back to the way things were before." "Then I am staying," Thea said firmly. "If you will teach me how to survive up here, how to be your partner in this life, I am staying." "I will teach you everything I know," Asher promised, "and we will learn the rest together." He kissed her then, and it felt like coming home. When they finally broke apart, Asher took her hand and led her back to the cabin. Inside, everything was just as she remembered, warm and cozy and welcoming. But now it felt like more than just shelter. It felt like the beginning of something wonderful. That night, they talked for hours about their 2 weeks apart. Thea told him about her time in Georgetown, about the work she had done and the confidence she had gained. Asher told her about how he had spent the time preparing the cabin for winter and trying to distract himself from missing her. "I tried to tell myself I was being foolish," Asher admitted. that you could not possibly feel the same way I did after knowing each other for such a short time. But then I would remember the way you looked at me, the way you kissed me, and I would let myself hope. You are not being foolish, Thea said softly. What we have is real, Asher. I have never felt this way about anyone before, so certain, so right. I felt that way the moment you showed up at my door, Asher said. Soaked from the rain, shivering and scared, but still so brave. I gave you dry clothes and a safe place to stay, but you gave me something much more valuable. You gave me hope. You made me feel human again. And you gave me freedom, Thea said. You treated me like an equal, like someone worth listening to. You helped me without trying to control me. You gave me your heart, Asher, and I am giving you mine. They sealed their promises with another kiss, and this time it was different. This time there was no uncertainty, no holding back. They had both made their choices, and now they could fully embrace what was growing between them. The weeks that followed were some of the happiest of Thea's life. Asher taught her everything he knew about surviving in the mountains. She learned how to set snares, how to identify edible plants, how to read the weather and the land. She learned how to cook over an open fire, how to cure meat and preserve vegetables, how to keep the cabin clean and organized. She was not always good at it at first, but she was determined, and Asher was endlessly patient with her mistakes. In return, Thea brought something to Asher's life that had been missing for a long time: joy. She made him laugh with her observations about the world. She challenged him to think about things differently. She filled the cabin with warmth and light and life. Together, they created a partnership that was based on mutual respect, shared responsibilities, and a deepening love that grew stronger with each passing day. About a month after Thea had returned, Asher asked her to marry him. It was not a grand gesture or a fancy proposal. They were sitting by the fire after dinner, and he simply took her hand and said, "Thea, will you marry me? Will you be my wife and my partner and share this life with me?" Thea did not even hesitate. "Yes," she said, tears of happiness streaming down her face. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." They rode down to Georgetown the next week and found a traveling preacher who agreed to marry them. Adelaide hosted a small celebration at the boarding house, and a few of the people Thea had befriended during her 2 weeks in town came to wish them well. It was simple and informal and absolutely perfect. When they returned to the cabin as husband and wife, Asher carried Thea over the threshold, both of them laughing at the tradition. That night, they consummated their marriage with tenderness and passion. Two people who had found each other against all odds and were determined to build a life together. The months passed, and Thea settled into her new life with surprising ease. Winter came, bringing heavy snows that isolated them completely from the outside world, but she did not mind. She was warm and safe and happy, spending her days working alongside Asher and her nights curled up with him by the fire. They talked about everything under the sun, played cards, read books to each other. They made love and made plans for the future. Spring arrived, bringing new life to the mountains. Thea discovered she was pregnant, and the news filled both of them with a joy so profound it was almost overwhelming. They had not planned it, but they both wanted it desperately. "A baby," Asher said wonderingly, his hand on Thea's still flat stomach. "Our baby." "Are you happy?" Thea asked, though she could see the answer in his eyes. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Asher said. "I never thought I would have a family of my own. Never thought I deserved one after everything I did during the war, but you have given me a second chance at life, Thea. You have given me everything." "We have given each other everything," Thea corrected gently. "We saved each other, Asher. And now we are going to raise a child together, in this beautiful place, surrounded by love." The pregnancy progressed smoothly. though Thea was grateful when Adelaide made the long journey up to the cabin to check on her and provide advice. The older woman had delivered many babies in her time, and her presence was reassuring. "You are doing well, dear," Adelaide said after examining Thea. "The baby is healthy and strong, just like its parents." In the late summer of 1879, Thea gave birth to a son. The labor was long and difficult, but Asher never left her side, holding her hand and encouraging her through every contraction. When the baby finally arrived, squalling and healthy, Asher actually cried. Thea had never seen him cry before, and the sight of this big, tough mountain man weeping with joy over their newborn son moved her beyond words. They named him Samuel, after the old trapper who had taught Asher how to survive in the mountains. Little Samuel had his mother's dark eyes and his father's strong build, and from the very beginning, he was loved with a fierceness that took both parents by surprise. "I will protect him with my life," Asher said, holding his tiny son with a gentleness that seemed at odds with his size. "I will teach him to be strong and kind and honorable. I will never let him feel like he has to run away from himself the way I did." "We will teach him together," Thea said, resting her head on Asher's shoulder as they both gazed at their son. "We will raise him to know he is loved, to know he has value, to know he can choose his own path in life." The years that followed were filled with hard work and simple pleasures. They expanded the cabin, adding a small bedroom for Samuel and eventually for the two children who came after him, a daughter named Rose in 1881, and another son named James in 1883. The cabin in the mountains became a home, filled with the sounds of children laughing and playing, of Thea singing as she worked, of Asher teaching his children everything he knew about the wilderness. They were not completely isolated. A few times a year, they would make the journey to Georgetown for supplies and to visit Adelaide and the other friends they had made. The children loved these trips to town, though they were always happy to return to their mountain home. Word eventually reached them that Richard Carlisle had died of a heart attack in 1882, and Thea's father had passed away a year later. Thea felt a complicated mix of emotions at the news. She had not forgiven her father for trying to sell her into marriage, but she did not wish him dead either. In the end, she chose to let go of the past and focus on the future she was building with Asher and their children. As the years went by, Thea never regretted her decision to leave Denver and build a life in the mountains. She had found something precious up here: freedom, purpose, love. She had found a partner who respected her and challenged her and adored her. She had found a place where she could be fully herself, without pretense or restriction. Asher, for his part, often said that the day Thea showed up at his door, soaked from the rain and desperate for help, was the day his real life began. She had walked into his isolation and brought him back to the world. She had shown him that he was capable of love and connection, that his past did not have to define his future. He had given her dry clothes and shelter from the storm, but she had given him back his humanity and his heart. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1889, they stood together outside their cabin, watching their 3 children play in the meadow nearby. Samuel was now a sturdy 9-year-old who could already track game and set traps. Rose was 8, full of curiosity and constantly asking questions about everything she saw. Little James was 6, quieter than his siblings but with a gentle soul that reminded Thea of Asher. "Can you believe it has been 10 years?" Asher asked, his arm around Thea's waist. "Some days it feels like a lifetime," Thea said. "Other days it feels like just yesterday that I stumbled to your door in that storm." "Best storm of my life," Asher said with a smile. Thea laughed and leaned into him. "Mine too." Everything I have now, our children, our home, this life we have built, it all started because I had the courage to run and you had the kindness to help." "We helped each other," Asher said, echoing words Thea had spoken years ago. "We saved each other." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching their children and the mountains that surrounded them. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. It was beautiful and peaceful, and Thea felt a deep sense of contentment settle over her. "What are you thinking about?" Asher asked. "About how far we have come," Thea said. "About how I was supposed to marry a man I did not love and live a life that would have killed my spirit. And instead I found you. I found love and freedom and a purpose. I found everything I ever wanted without even knowing I wanted it." "I was thinking something similar," Asher admitted. "About how I was ready to spend the rest of my life alone, convinced that was all I deserved. And then you showed up and changed everything. You gave me a reason to hope again, to connect, to build something lasting." Thea turned to face him fully, reaching up to touch his bearded cheek just as she had done years ago in the starlight. "I love you, Asher Xavier. I loved you from almost the first moment I met you, and I will love you until my last breath." "And I love you, Thea Xavier," Asher said, using her married name with pride. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me. You and our children, this family, this life. You gave me all of it." He kissed her then, a kiss that held 10 years of love and commitment and partnership. When they broke apart, their children had noticed and were running toward them, calling for their parents. Samuel reached them first and wrapped his arms around both their legs. Rose and James quickly followed, and suddenly they were all in a group embrace, laughing and talking over each other. Later that night, after the children were asleep in their beds, Asher and Thea sat by the fire as they had done countless times before. Thea was mending one of Samuel's shirts while Asher carved a small wooden horse for James. It was a peaceful, domestic scene, the kind that might have seemed boring to some people but felt perfect to them. "You ever wonder what would have happened if you had stayed in Georgetown?" Asher asked suddenly. "If you had decided to build a life there instead of coming back to me?" "Never," Thea said firmly. "I know exactly where I was meant to be, and it is here with you. This was always where I belonged." "I feel the same way," Asher said. "You were meant to walk through that door. I was meant to give you shelter. We were meant to find each other." "Fate," Thea said softly. "Or luck," Asher suggested. "Either way, I am grateful for it every single day." They fell silent again, content in each other's presence. Outside, the wind whispered through the pine trees and an owl hooted in the distance. Inside, the fire crackled and popped, filling the cabin with warmth and light. It was a perfect moment, one of thousands they had shared and would continue to share for many years to come. As they prepared for bed that night, Thea thought about everything they had been through together. The fear and uncertainty of those first days, the growing connection that neither of them had expected, the decision to build a life together despite all the reasons they should not have. They had taken a chance on each other, and it had paid off in ways neither of them could have imagined. She climbed into bed beside Asher, and he immediately pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her in the protective embrace that had become so familiar over the years. She felt safe and loved and cherished, feelings she had never experienced before meeting him. "Good night, my love," Asher murmured, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Good night," Thea whispered back. As she drifted off to sleep, Thea smiled, thinking about the woman she had been 10 years ago, desperate, soaked from the rain, stumbling through the storm with no idea where she was going. That woman had been running away from something, driven by fear and desperation. But the woman she was now was running toward something, toward love, toward family, toward a future filled with possibility. Asher had given her more than dry clothes and shelter that stormy night. He had given her a chance at a new life, a real life, one filled with meaning and purpose. And she had given him the same thing, pulled him out of his isolation, and showed him that he was worthy of love and happiness. They had saved each other in the most fundamental way possible, and together they had built something beautiful and lasting. Their children would grow up knowing they were loved and valued. They would have opportunities and choices that neither Asher nor Thea had been given. They would understand that family was not just about blood, but about commitment and respect and unconditional love. The years continued to pass, bringing their share of challenges and joys. Samuel grew into a strong young man who loved the mountains as much as his father did. Rose became a teacher, eventually opening a small school in Georgetown where she taught the children of miners and merchants. James discovered a talent for woodworking and built beautiful furniture that people came from miles around to purchase. All three children married and had families of their own, giving Asher and Thea grandchildren to dote on. The cabin in the mountains remained the heart of their family, the place where everyone gathered for holidays and celebrations. It was a place of love and laughter, of stories and traditions, of belonging. Asher and Thea grew old together, their love deepening with each passing year. They never lost the spark that had ignited between them that stormy night so many years ago. They still held hands when they walked, still kissed each other goodbye when one of them left for town, still looked at each other with the same wonder and affection they had felt at the beginning. On a spring morning in 1915, when Thea was 60 and Asher was 63, they sat together on the porch of their cabin, watching the sunrise over the mountains. It was a ritual they had shared for decades, this quiet time together before the day began in earnest. "Do you remember the night we met?" Thea asked, her hand in Asher's. "Every detail," Asher said. "The storm, the way you looked standing at my door, the feeling I had when I saw you, like lightning." "Like lightning," Thea agreed with a smile. "That is exactly what it was." "I gave you dry clothes," Asher said, reciting the story they had told their children and grandchildren many times over the years. "And you gave me your heart," Thea finished, "just like I gave you mine." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the day unfold. They had lived a good life together, a full life, rich with love and meaning. They had raised 3 wonderful children, built a home, created a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. Whatever years they had left, they would spend them together, just as they had spent all the years since that fateful night. They had made a promise to each other, standing in the starlight outside this very cabin, that they would choose each other every day for the rest of their lives. And they had kept that promise through good times and bad, through sickness and health, through all the challenges and joys that life had thrown their way. As the sun rose fully above the mountains, bathing the world in golden light, Asher squeezed Thea's hand gently. She squeezed back, and they smiled at each other with a love that had not dimmed even after all these years. They had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances. 2 people running from their pasts and stumbling into a future neither had dared to imagine. And they had built something extraordinary together, a love story for the ages, set against the wild and beautiful backdrop of the Colorado mountains. It was a story that would be told and retold by their descendants for generations to come. The story of how a young woman showed up at a mountain man's door, soaked from the rain and desperate for help. How he gave her dry clothes and shelter and kindness. And how, in return, she gave him back his life and his heart. It was a story of courage and choice, of love that conquered fear, of 2 people who took a chance on each other and found everything they had been searching for. And it was a story with a perfect ending, not because their lives were without difficulty or sorrow, but because they faced everything together with love and commitment and an unshakable faith in each other. They had found their happily ever after not in some distant, perfect future, but in the everyday moments of their shared life, in the morning coffee and evening conversations, in the laughter of their children and grandchildren, in the simple act of holding hands and watching the sunrise. They had found it, and they had held on to it, and they had lived it fully until their very last days. That was what made their story truly special, not the dramatic beginning, but the beautiful, ordinary, extraordinary life they had built together afterward. A life filled with love, purpose, and the deep satisfaction of knowing they had chosen well. As they rose from the porch to begin another day together, Thea looked back at the mountains that had been their home for so many years. Those same mountains where she had stumbled through a storm, desperate and afraid, not knowing that salvation was just around the next bend in the trail. She was grateful for that storm now. Grateful for every difficult step that had led her to Asher's door. Grateful for the courage it had taken to run away from the life that had been planned for her, and toward the unknown future that had been waiting. Because in running away from one thing, she had run straight into the arms of the one person who was meant to love her, protect her, and walk beside her through life. And that, Thea thought as she followed her husband into their cabin for breakfast, was the very definition of a happy ending. The story of Asher and Thea Xavier was complete, a love story born in a storm and lasting a lifetime, proving that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places, and that true love, when you find it, is worth fighting for with everything you have.